देख रहे हैं बुर्का विजन। मुलाहिजा फरमाइए हमारा सिलसिलेवार प्रोग्राम बुर्का थ्रू एजेस। अपने हालात के मुताबिक बुर्के तश्कील दिए हैं। पत्थर के दौर में पत्तों, घास फूस और फूल पत्तियों से सतर का काम लिया गया। इस बुर्के की सादगी और रंगीनी मुलाहिजा हो।
अमीर को नहीं मानते और फैसला तलवार से होगा। कौन पैगंबर तेरा, कौन है तेरा, कौन खुदा? कानून की खातिर, ईमान की खातिर, अकीदे की खातिर
प्रोग्राम पेश करते हैं वाया फ्रॉम सैटेलाइट।
हेलो हेलो,
ऊपर नीचे देखे चांद, आओ मिलकर खेले।
प्लीज मेरी मदद करें। आप तो जानते हैं कि मैं इस ड्रामे का रावी हूँ। ईमान की खातिर, अकीदे की खातिर फांसी लगा दो। बिशन सिंह और टोबा टेक सिंह जी।
टोबा किथे है? पाकिस्तान च है कि हिंदुस्तान च? मैं पाकिस्तान च रहूं, टोबा इथे जा। ऊपर दी गुरगुरन किसदी बेध्याना दी मूंग दी दाल आउदी लालटन गवर्नमेंट ऑफ टोबा टेक से।
ये ना ये बिजली गड़े से लगती है, बादल गड़े से लगते हैं, बहुत मुसलधार बारिश लगती है। साबरा समाज जिंदा है।
चुप करो, बस करो, चुप हो जाओ।
ओ जानी जुल्म करे गाल का गुदरवाना, ओ जानी जुल्म करे गाल का गुदरवाना।
तू और यहाँ क्यों रहता है?
पहनाया लिबास उसको, औरैब जिसे देखा, बेऐब जिसे पाया, बख्शी उसे उरियानी।
तेरे पास अपना नंगापन ढांपने के लिए कपड़े नहीं है क्या? ये कंबल तो पड़ा है।
इससे तो मैंने तेरे नंगेपन को ढांप रखा है बादशाह।
क्या बकता है?
ना मैं देव, ना मैं मस्जिद, ना काबा के
Selves seated, and then we'll start. Noah? The middle. Great. Okay, well, we're all mic'd up, so the idea is that you can hear me as soon as I start speaking, that I become properly audible. Welcome to this evening's event, another in International Alert's Peace Talks, this time on the theme of art and peace building. I'm Dan Smith, and I'm Secretary General of International Alert. I want to just do one or two housekeeping things first, and then I will introduce the topic and introduce our panel, and then we'll get on with the evening. The first housekeeping thing is, as always, is this, the mobile phone. We really want you to use it. The louder it rings, the better it will be. Have loud conversations on it. No, we do want you to use it if it's a smartphone, because we would hope that you would like to tweet. And if you are tweeting, please use the hashtag #PeaceTalks. And on the other hand, please turn it at least to silent. And if you're not going to be tweeting, then why not turn it off? Connect yourself from the virtual world in order to focus on this evening. As far as any fire alarm is concerned, there's no fire drill planned, so if you hear it go, it's the real thing, and we go quietly and neatly out there and take the stairs down in the usual way, not the elevator or the lift. One last thing. I'll probably forget it at the end of the discussion, so I'll tell you right now, which is that after we have finished the conversation here, everybody is invited to have some refreshments, which are through the glass doors that are opposite the door as you come out here. And then, obviously, questions which you didn't get to ask or questions which weren't answered properly, you can follow up on a bit more. Now, International Alert, arts, what's the connection? The last few years, International Alert, which is a peace-building organization working in 25 countries around the world, has focused its work on 5 main methods, right? Including dialogue, research, what we call capacity building, what we call accompaniment, and advocacy and outreach. Those are the 5 that we've thought of ourselves as using. And in fact, during that period of time, we've also used in different places different kinds of art. And we've recognized that by not really exploring the possibilities of art for peace building, we were hampering ourselves. And so in the last year and a half or so, we've taken the decision to get ourselves more and more engaged in understanding what part art can play in our work and for our work. And this has taken us to the point where now, we're talking with different people. We have different programs beginning to go. We've got different ideas which we're floating. And sort of, I'm not quite sure if you would say by happenstance or through fate or whatever, but a play came to be put on and staged in the London Theatre, the National Theatre, Dara, which is written by Shahid, who sits here, and I'll introduce properly in a moment, and who Shahid's background is with a theatre company for the last 25, 30 years in Pakistan, which focuses quite a lot on the theme of peace. So this made a perfect moment to get together and talk about this a bit and involve other people in the conversation and get our ideas. We are in a doing phase already, but we're also in a learning phase. So we really very much want your contributions and your thoughts as to how we can take this work further. To discuss that, to help us develop our thinking, we've got really a fantastic panel. Shahid Nadeem, whom I've already referred to, is the author of Dara, and he's the director of the Ajoka Theatre in Pakistan, which celebrated its 30th anniversary last year. For approximately the last 25 years or so, has been doing cross-border work, thus both in Pakistan and in India, and which very much takes peace and human rights as being its major themes. The video which you were just watching is a very brief and encapsulated version of some of their work on those themes. And as you saw it, particularly looking at the question of how you do theatre in the time of jihad. And I think that, that theatre company has been very brave and bold in addressing these kinds of issues. So Shahid, very, very welcome here. Sitting next to Shahid is Ruth Daniel, who is the co-director of In Place of War, which is a program in the an organization in the University of Manchester, which focuses on, again, art and peace building, creativity in sites of conflict, working on that through the mobility of artists, through developing cultural spaces, physical spaces where people can come, and with a digital platform for musicians to get together in virtual space from around the world. And alongside of me here is Anwar Akhtar, who is one of what he didn't christen, but I'm going to christen, the Magnificent Seven, who came up with the idea of the rich mix, who saw it through, who had a fraught few years getting it going, and Anwar was the founding director of this place. He's now director of the Samosa, which is a cultural space and platform for people of Pakistani origin, both in Pakistan and in the UK. And he was a consultant working with Shahid on Dara and so on. So I think we've got a really good combination of people. The way that we work these events, peace talks, is a couple of questions each in some kind of random higgledy-piggledy order to the panelists, get some views aired, get some ideas and thoughts out on the table, and then bring you all in, and then have a discussion between us. Then I have to try and bring that to an end more or less at the time that I thought beforehand I ought to bring it to an end. That's the difficult part of my evening. And once that's done, then we go and have some refreshments and we chat some more. So, I want to kick off. Shahid, Dara is really quite a big deal, if you'll excuse me saying. It's in its final few days of a run that's, 35 or 40 performances
Yes.
or so? It's maybe, I don't know, this would be worth checking, but it's maybe the first time an Asian play about Asian history has had this prominence on the London stage. It's being shown in the National Theatre. How do you see the relationship? And it deals with a specific period of history in the Indian subcontinent, in Pakistan, in the Mughal Empire, and a point when there was a kind of more than a strategic, historical choice of paths that the relationship between Islam and politics or Islam and power could take. So how do you see the relationship between Dara and the work of Ajoka? How do they fit together for you?
Well, I mean, it's as far as Dara is concerned, it's not just a play about period or characters in the Indian history, but in fact it was really a turning point for the history of modern India and that of Indian Muslims, because that was the time when decision or victory was achieved by a certain interpretation of Islam, which was a fundamentalist and narrow-minded and more like rigid kind of interpretation of Islamic teachings. And then that started a movement of puritanical and retrogressive version of Islam, which was not rooted in the soil where Muslims of India were living, and which did not allow any interaction, intellectual or cultural interaction with other communities living in India. So that was Aurangzeb, the younger brother of Shah Jahan, who built Taj Mahal in Agra. And the crown prince, the elder brother, Dara, was who's kind of demonized or vilified or sort of ridiculed in Indian Muslim discourse or accounts of history. But he was an amazing character, a Sufi, a practicing Sufi, and of course a prince and a commander at the same time, which causes certain conflicts, in fact some fatal conflicts, Then he was an artist. He was a scholar of comparative religion, a scholar of Sanskrit who translated the Hindu mystical texts from Sanskrit to Persian for the first time, and that's how they became known in the West. So he spent all his time in search for truth and learning about other religions, and then wrote several books showing how the teachings of all religions essentially are the same, and the common factors, especially among Hindu teachings and the Muslim teachings. So he was actually the way forward for Indian Muslims and for India. If a wrong turn had not been taken, maybe the present mess, this is just a conjecture, would not have been there in this form. Maybe the history of Indian Muslims would have been different. And the present like state ideology of country created in the name of Islam, Pakistan, would maybe not have been so conservative and so like fearful of other religions and other countries in the neighborhood. So in that context, we thought that this is a story which needs to be told to the people of Pakistan, also taken to the people of India. But we had no idea that National Theatre would also be interested.
When you talk about the conjecture that history could have been different, or the present could have been different if that historical moment had turned out differently, is that a conjecture which you think that the audience will arrive at? Or is that a conjecture which in one way or another through the text and through the production you sort of nudge them towards?
Well, we don't, in Ajoka, we don't lecture, we don't do propagandist theatre, but we have a point of view, and we look at society from a liberal, democratic, secular, modernist perspective. But like in this play, we had given Aurangzeb full chance to present his case. His sister, Roshan Ara, who was a close ally and quite instrumental in getting her elder brother killed, we give her also ample chance to express her opinion, and all is based on historical evidence. In the end, it is Aurangzeb, the emperor, in his last letter, he himself confessed all the guilts. So that was quite a surprise for us also when through our research we realized that in the end, 40 years later, 40 years of war and 40 years of destruction and 40 years of religious acrimony and killing of his kith and kin, after that he says that he was wrong. And he alone is responsible for the collapse which Mughal empire is going to face. So we don't give people answers, but if history or the characters of history themselves, they are providing a direction or an answer, then we leave it to the audience to follow.
And how has the audience reaction been in Pakistan, in
Oh,
India
it's
and here?
unbelievable. I mean, I think Anwar has been there. Their people, firstly, they are so hungry for entertainment, meaningful entertainment. Secondly, there are issues which are not being debated or discussed in society, in the media, or in political or educational or public platforms. So when they see a part of their history which has been distorted beyond recognition about this particular part of our history and also overall, and then also they see their culture being presented, because we present it according to the folk traditions of our region. So there's a lot of music and dance and humor and color and spirituality. So they got everything. They see their real culture, their real issues, and their real identity being acted out on the stage. So they, right from the first scene, they are in the play, and they don't wait till the end to applaud. So they will applaud, and we have to wait sometimes for a couple of minutes, and then when they die down, then we carry on. Even sometimes people raise slogans, they get so emotional. So they are very much part of the play,
Okay.
the audience.
I mean, it's great. Ruth, if I move along to you, there's a couple of things that I wanted to sort of put to you in a package together, see what you make of them, and we'll explore a bit. One is that you can think about art in relation to peace building as you can in general, as something that you watch or look at or visit or see or something. You walk around in an exhibition and so on. And you can also think about it as something that you do. Right? And I think that within peace building fields, as we've thought about this, both angles are potentially of interest. So I wanted you to focus a little bit onto the doing. And then your field very much, not exclusively, but very much is music. If people, by doing things, coming together, are sort of able to express them some kind of peaceful, peace-building, cohesive, nice instinct, right? Would anything do just as well? Or is there something that's special about music, or more broadly about artistic endeavor, which is different from, I don't know, building a house together or playing sport together or whatever? Any thought?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think I can answer that with one kind of case study, one example. A lot of the work that we do, well, all of the work we do is with the grassroots. So it's with young people making their own futures, changing their own futures. And often that's with art or with technology. I often talk about the city of Medellin in Colombia and as an example of a place where hip-hop, for me, has completely transformed a city.
Let's pause for a second and say that the word Medellin would be mostly known as sort of the connection with the word cartel, meaning drug. So the image of Medellin looked at from far outside is a kind of narcotics-crazed, criminally run chaos. But you're talking about Medellin and hip-hop.
Yeah, so this is it. So if we talk about the history of Medellin, it suffered from massive troubles because of drugs, and obviously Pablo Escobar is from Medellin, and that has a lot of negative consequences on the whole of the city. There is a quote that says, "We were born to die in Medellin," and this is what young people's view of the world is, or was, about 5 or 7 years ago. Basically, if you were a young man in Medellin, you went into a drug cartel. That was kind of the only option that you had. And young people in Medellin decided they wanted to change the future for themselves. They wanted to have other options. And they were inspired by the hip-hop movement in New York in the 1970s and decided that they would start making hip-hop. And this is why music is such an incredible art form, because hip-hop is about a vocal and about a beat. And you don't need a lot of equipment, or you don't need a lot of technology to do that. And hip-hop is a great way that people can talk about their reality. They can talk about their social situation. But also, hip-hop has a lot of similarities with being in a gang. As a male, you can assert yourself. You can have a rap battle. You can vocalize your situation with other young men. But you can do that in a non-violent way. I have a friend called Lupa. He's an MC from the city of Medellin. And he says, if it wasn't for hip-hop, I would be dead. This is the kind of reality that he has. When he was young, he was in a drug cartel. And he discovered hip-hop. And that gave him a sense of identity and an alternative to being in a drug cartel. Now, Medellin is a relatively safe place. There are 2,500 hip-hop crews in this one city. That's how huge hip-hop is there. But hip-hop has transformed to have much wider repercussions on the whole of the city. So now there are hip-hop schools where, as a youngster, from the age of, I don't know how high, from about this high, you can go to a hip-hop school and learn all of the different forms of hip-hop, which is not just music, but street art and dance and all sorts of different things. There are lots of schools placed across the city, and the city supports hip-hop concerts because they can see the peace that this brings within the city. And of course, through hip-hop, you can learn transferable skills that you can then take and get jobs and kind of develop yourself professionally. So for me, hip-hop is such a huge and strong force in the whole of this city, and such a positive force within the city as well.
Can you give us, you've given us one number, which is 2,500 hip-hop crews. Can you give us any other numbers? I mean, do you have a sense of how many people have been in some ways actively through the program, and how big the population of Medellin is?
Well, I know that there were 40,000 murders, I think, over about 8 years in the city of young men through drug cartels. So it was it was the biggest murder capital in the world until very recently. And this has totally transformed now. Thousands and thousands of people go through the hip-hop schools. The government have just taken a model that developed very organically, and now they're building hip-hop schools in every single comuna or neighbourhood in the city. So this is really, really positive and really does change people's futures in the city. So for me, it's a really exciting place to be and to see this. And what's really interesting is some of the hip-hop groups that have come from the streets, literally developed on the streets, are now incredibly famous in the whole of Colombia and in fact in the world. So there's a hip-hop crew called Crew Peligroso, and now they're playing festivals right across the world. So it's great to see that kind of progression route for hip-hop artists. And they're telling their stories, you know, on stages like Glastonbury Festival and talking about the situation, the social situation they face in the cities that they live.
Great. I mean, we're going to come back to this question of sort of the reach and from an artistic endeavour, how it reaches out. And I wanted to start in on that with you, Anwar. I mean, you've been involved in the production and the work on Dara, but you've also more broadly been involved in cultural and arts-based work for a time, and you clearly see a sort of a social implication, a social meaning to doing that. So if you started just by thinking about Dara, just for the moment, I mean, what's the meaning for us in the UK of it being staged, not just here, but at the National Theatre?
Thank you. I think there's a particular power, and I mean, I was talking to Shahid, and we're still quite stunned by the scale of what we've done, and that, as with any major successful cultural collaboration, there are and a collective effort. And what's made Dara, I think, so powerful is a particular magic or alchemy between the kind of artistic collaboration at the National Theatre, the partnership with Ajoka and Shahid's work, and in a small way, the sort of translation conduit Samosa as a group of British, Pakistani media and writers have been able to do. And there's a few things about Dara. One is its scale. It's 960 seats. It's a Littleton. It's not with all due respect, a studio theatre in Hackney or Liverpool or Lewisham. The National Theatre, the first time has been a significant production in that space about the relationship between three great faiths of South Asia, Islam, Sikh and Hindu, and also extrapolating from that Britain's relationship with India, partition, the Commonwealth, and cultural relations in Britain today. And it came out of conflict. It came out of some very strong criticisms of a play called English People Very Nice that was on at the National Theatre, which had a particular narrative or discourse about migration and British identity and contract of being, which essentially had, and it was a wonderful, the excellence of the writing, the excellence of the acting. It's a National Theatre. And the narrative was essentially that Britain was a nation of Mongols. The Romans, the Saxons, the Vikings, the Danes, the Huguenots, the Irish, the Poles, all the way through to Jamaican and Asian migration. Everyone comes, everyone integrates, everyone becomes British. But what happens when a community doesn't buy that social contract? And the implication was that the Muslim community wasn't buying the British social contract. And the response of the Samosa to that was, you've got to find the stories. And there was an incredibly generous offer from Nicholas Heitner in response to criticism. And it was very telling what he asked for, actually. It was very specific. He didn't say, find us the activists or find us the politics or the journalism or the writers. He said, find the playwrights and the stories from Pakistan that bear witness. And I'd been travelling in Pakistan, I'd spent time with Ajoka, and the story of Dara was just, which I can expand on a little if you like. I mean, but in a nutshell, in the way that anyone that watches The Crucible, whilst they're watching a morality tale about 17th, 18th century witch hunts within Christianity, is effectively watching an essay on McCarthyism. And Dara is, although set in 1659, and the succession battle and relations between Muslim, Sikh and Hindu, is also an essay on ISIS and the Taliban and the House of Saud. And the comparison from a national was fascinating. And I've been accused of cultural imperialism for this, which I'm still reeling from, but we made comparisons with Elizabeth. But rather than Elizabeth, it was Benazir Bhutto. Rather than the Vatican, it was the House of Saud. Rather than Walsingham, it was the ISI. Rather than Spain, it was India. And this history play, India and the emergence of Pakistan, the National looked at it just like they look at all history plays. I think we've come out with something very powerful. And I've also got some very happy news to share, which is if people haven't seen it, and I hope most people here have, it's on till Saturday, if not, it has now been filmed, and there will be access to a film version of it via the National Theatre Archives. And for curriculum, history studies, it's an absolute. So I'm happy to share more information about that later.
Okay, so let me come back to Shahid for a second, because Anwar has placed this in kind of the UK context. Right? You staged it in 3 countries now, or more, or just Pakistan, India?
Basically Pakistan and India.
And here. Is there other major differences doing that? I don't mean technical differences. I don't mean, whether the labour force is unionised or how good the facilities are. But beyond that, the sort of the social, politico-cultural differences. And if there are, how do you deflect them or absorb them, or how do you respond to them?
Well, in Pakistan or South Asia, history is not history. It's not past, it's past. It's very much there in your present. In fact, shaping your future also. So, and the debate between the 2 brothers, Dara Shikoh, the Crown Prince, and Aurangzeb, the one who succeeded, that debate is not just between 2 princes or 2 characters of power, but it is about 2 interpretations of Islam, 2 worldviews, 2 mindsets. So, and then the way Aurangzeb, being a very righteous and apparently very pious Muslim, at the same time totally Machiavellian in character, the way he conspired and the way he accused his elder brother of apostasy and blasphemy, and got him convicted by a Shariat court and then eventually executed. So that debate and that violence, and especially from the extremist element or violent extremist element in Pakistan or in the region or in the Muslim world, that is very much a part of our everyday reality. Every day there are suicide bombings, every day there are attacks, and there is a war going on between Pakistan army and these extremist elements. So for people, it is this history, although we have absolutely made no sort of amendments in the story. The story takes place as it is, and in fact, it could not be more dramatic as it was, and we didn't have to sort of add any elements to it. But for people, it's their presence, their survival is at stake. So they, and then we, as I said earlier, we present it with the spiritual and mystical and religious and cultural context of our society, and a culture which we have been deprived of in Pakistan. Since the creation of Pakistan, we were told that you have nothing to do with the subcontinental or South Asian culture. You are a part of the Middle East, you are a part of the Muslim Ummah, a Muslim community, and so all your centuries of your culture and your traditions or your literature and your poetry and your heritage, all was kind of surrendered. So we are not only reclaiming Dara, the prince who had been forgotten, but we are also reclaiming our cultural heritage, which in 1947, at the time of partition, we were denied, and we were told that Pakistan has nothing to do with India. That's a separate country, two-nation theory, or interpreted in a very extreme way. So I think our production of Dara was, in that context, it was very much a part of our present. It was not a period play, and it had that force of culture and force of the true tenets of or true teachings of Islam, which people wanted to associate. So it was more enthusiastic and more, I think the impact on the Pakistani audience was so great that the matter had to go to the Senate of Pakistan, where they discussed that why Aurangzeb is presented as a villain and why Dara is presented as a hero. Because General Ziaul Haq, the military dictator who was instrumental in creating this Taliban menace during the times of CIA supported war against the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. So he had actually decreed as a commander-in-chief that every military cantonment should have an Aurangzeb block. So Aurangzeb was the model ruler for the dictator like Ziaul Haq and Taliban, and a whole mindset, the Salafi Islam, the Saudi influence in Pakistan. So this is the context. So when it was brought to national, obviously some of that context, some of that, those elements had to be sacrificed for good reasons, so that it is more accessible to mainstream British audience. And I'm glad that Ajoka, Pakistani theatre, and Dara's story has come not just to some pockets of British society, but right in the mainstream where it needs to be told, and the image of Pakistan and Islam needs to be corrected.
I mean, part of what you're talking about, what you're doing about understanding of history and the attempt to reclaim that history, that heritage that was surrendered with partition, you're really doing something about identity and how identity is formed, right? I mean, you're addressing something really quite deep, and it seems to me it's really striking that you get both, on the one hand, this enthusiastic response from the audience, right? And also on the other hand, it's got to be a topic of debate in the Senate. I mean,
yeah,
you must have felt pretty good when you realized you'd shaken them up enough to be thinking.
Yeah, controversy is something we love.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Anwar, it is a different context here, right? It's got things in common, not least the community and so on, which has connections, really living connections with Pakistan, with people with their immediate families are there and here, and so on. But it is a different context. How do you feel that those kinds of issues, and especially around the sort of identity questions, can play out over here?
Well, I hope it's a significant offer and a significant contribution. I mean, there's a couple of things that have driven this whole process, and there's this surreal parallel journey of intellectual rigor and authenticity and excellence, which is what drives the production at the National, and also a wish to engage and inform, and frankly some of the idiocy around commentary on Muslim history. And I mean, there are people running think tanks and policy institutes in this country that my cousin, who's a cab driver in Manchester, is better informed on relations, and yet these organisations are, well, I'm not going to name them, but they're ubiquitous, and they seem to be putting up candidates for bizarre things in Dudley and so on and so forth. But what's brilliant about Dara, it's a bit like if you go to Joan of Arc, you can see a history play, and it can be about gender, it can be about military power and brute force, it can be about religious extremism versus tolerance. And Dara has kind of got those themes to it as well. And the relation with Pakistan and British Pakistanis, which is quite different from, you know, if you're in Pakistan all the time and live there, I've always been struck by the similarity between the Pakistani diaspora and the Israeli diaspora and the relationship with Pakistan and Israel. And I think Dara starts to explore some of the contemporary history. So if you think about it, both countries came out of British mandates at the end of Empire. Both are nuclear powers. Both have got ridiculously loyal diasporas that often take a very one-dimensional view of the reality of what's happening in the country. Now speaking specifically about Pakistan, there's a narrative of having been wronged in terms of millions of people who were ethnically cleansed from India, my parents included, who were part of a human caravan that had to flee Amritsar and went to Multan and Bahalpur. And many British Pakistanis, their parents are, you know, from that migration and the conflict of partition. Equally, Lahore expelled its Hindu and its Sikh population in large part. And if you stand in Lahore, you feel the vacuum that's been left by the absence of some of the indigenous communities of that city. And I think one of the things that the conflicts today require an historical analysis, a cultural analysis. And one of the things that's been interesting about Dara is they've been getting 24-25% Asian audiences, which is for any theatre, not just the national, but any mainstream UK major cultural institution is 24% more than normal. And so just that in itself has a huge power. And I speak as a regular theatre goer. It's always loved the history and gone through the canon over the years. And so I hope what Dara does is lead to more productions, more commissions, more discourse, and we get away from the idiocy of a sort of securitization narrative, normally linked to a funding application to DCLG, that certain think tanks are just driving, because it's a lot more complicated than that. There's stuff that's been going on for centuries, and there's no, I mean, prevent is not the answer to it. Sure. Analysis is.
So just to move away now from the sort of the particular, Dara and Britain and Pakistan. Ruth, one of the things which I wanted to explore with you is the wider resonance or the wider impact that something like the hip-hop or major performance, Dara, or the work of Ajoka can have. I mean, In Place of War has been running as a project for about, how long? About 10 years. Yeah. So you've built up a body of experience. You've developed some ideas about what works better and what doesn't work. You know, a few favoured projects have had to kind of go by the wayside because the conditions weren't really right, and a few surprises have come through. So tell us a bit about that in terms of which ones, what kind of work seems to get the wider resonance.
I mean, I guess it depends all over the world. We work with so many different art forms and in so many different places. I mean, for me, an example that I really like, an organisation that we're working with at the moment in Zimbabwe is called Magamba, and they use satire and, again, hip-hop to open up a space in Zimbabwe for political discourse in a place where, if I'm in a bar in Zimbabwe, I can't talk to my friends about politics. It's just, you can't do that. But what they do is they create a satirical news programme called the Zambezi News, where they criticise, provoke the government. And this programme is distributed and watched by 9 million people in Zimbabwe. A lot of those people from townships. So they produce DVDs and distribute them to the townships. And this is a really interesting thing. So they're opening up a space through satire to have conversations that otherwise would not happen there. They also put on a festival called Shoko, which is a hip-hop festival. And again, musicians, bands, artists, word artists perform, again, talking about the political situation that they face there. And the festival's attended by thousands of people. And this is okay. This is a space where, through creativity, you can have these conversations. And that really fascinates me because literally, as I say, if I'm in a bar, it's something that you just cannot talk about. People are very scared. So for me, that really shows the power of art to kind of to open up opportunity to have discourse. But one of the things that I think is really powerful across the world, one of the things that we're now trying to build are the cultural spaces. So places very much like we're in now, we really started to recognise the value of physical space as a means to bring people together, to offer them an opportunity to have creative freedom and to make creative work. And we're not talking about large-scale productions, we're talking about grassroots, people coming in from a very early age and having the opportunity to make art. And that can be from dance to theatre, to learning orchestral instruments, to hip-hop and so on. I just wanted to give a couple of examples of those amazing spaces that we've encountered. So one of them is an organisation called Afro Reggae, based in Brazil. They have a nice relationship with the UK, so some of you might have heard of them already. They started out as a community newspaper based in a very dangerous favela in Rio. And this community newspaper offered community members the opportunity to talk about their lives and share their stories in a way they'd not been able to before. But this newspaper grew to a kind of dance group and then grew and grew. And last time I visited Rio, I went to see the space. It's a huge cultural centre based right in the heart of the favela. And you can see it from anywhere in the favela because it has this huge fist that comes out of the top of the building. It's 6 floors of learning how to DJ, learning dance, learning theatre, learning IT skills. And it's accessed by hundreds of young people every single day. And this space alone has transformed the favela to a relatively safe place. Young people go to the space. And one of the things that I think when I was younger is when I got to about 11, I was very bored because there wasn't very much for me to do. And youth centres in the UK were not great. And I always think that boredom leads to naughtiness. And I think, depending on where you are, that naughtiness can kind of, vary. And I think if you're in a favela, that can mean that you end up in a really dangerous situation, being in a drug cartel or whatever. And so I think these spaces, at the very bare minimum, relieve people of boredom. They give people something to do. So earlier last year, I was in a township in Zimbabwe called Makokoba, in a place called Bulawayo. And I was just there for a holiday, to have a nice time, for a barbecue. And but I was really struck by this place. This place is incredibly beautiful, unlike anywhere else I've been in the world. A community that's very isolated and a community that suffers desperate poverty. But full of young people who are, young kids running around pretending to be aeroplanes. And it's really, really beautiful place. However, when the children get to be about 11 years old, 12 years old, I think there's a realization for them that there's now nothing for them to do. They're becoming adults, and they're seeing the consequences of the desperate poverty on the situation around them. So there's no job opportunities, and there's literally no resources at all in this township. And for me, I saw a lot of the children then taking drugs, so lots and lots of drug abuse. Children are drinking codeine. And what I asked them is, what would make you stop doing this? And they said, we want to be able to make music. We want to be able to make art. And they wanted to have a place in which they could do that. So part of the work of In Place of War now is to go to these places and create cultural spaces inspired by those that we see across the rest of the world. Because I think that these cultural spaces and places like this, as you'll know, offer a place where people can come. People can be creative, offer a progression route to those who are really talented, but at a basic level, give people transferable skills, give people friends and a family around them that mean that they don't have to go and do the naughty things that, that they would maybe naturally do. So for me, physical cultural spaces is something that's just hugely, hugely important.
And one of the best ways of getting that wider resonance.
Exactly.
Multiplier effect. I want to open it up for questions from you all. There's one which I want to ask Shahid, and it comes out of something that Ruth was saying, but we also mentioned it when we talked earlier today, which is the capacity, the degree that it's possible to address taboo or difficult issues. And it seems, just from looking at that video, right, which, as I said, is an encapsulation, a brief encapsulation of some of your work, but that clearly you confront this issue. Difficult issues, taboo questions, and as you said, controversy is good. So tell us just a little